So, is there anything still kind of outstanding from last week, or anything still kind of sticking with you from our first couple of sessions that needs any further discussion or investigation?
I had one observation that I thought of at the tail end last week, but it was 8:30, so I made a note to table it to now.
Okay.
And one of the things I noticed uh, in the miracles, of which we read several of them, where people are getting healed or getting evil spirits taken out of them, or whatever the case might be. In not every case, but a majority of the cases, it seemed there was always the situation where Jesus was telling them, "Don't tell anyone, don't tell anyone."
Yep.
And being that Mark has a brevity, is very brevity and or brief in style. For that to have been repeated over and over again, it seems like there must have been a reason for that, and I'm just wondering what that was.
Yes, there are many, or there are a few theories on why that is. The most prominent we will be getting to eventually, but I will tell you it is called the Messianic Secret, is kind of the phrase that was coined by Lutheran theologian Wilhelm Wrede, another one of those fun-loving 19th century German scholars. And without tipping my hand too much, they believe, or Vrede believed it had to do with people jumping the gun on thinking they understood who Jesus was and what he was about. And we'll, like I said, we will definitely spend some more time with that at a later time. But yes, many people have noted that that kind of unusual thing, and the fact that Matthew and Luke do not pick it up to anywhere near the same extent is kind of interesting as well. So it's more important to Mark than it was to the people who use Mark as a basis for their own work. But yes, we will spend some time with the Messianic Secret in subsequent sessions. Oh, on the topic of subsequent sessions, before we do anything else, this will be our last session for 2020. And I love this time together, although it gives me great pleasure to say it's the last of something for 2020. So we will reconvene in January, and I will get info out to you as soon as I know exactly which Wednesday in January will be our first, but I will get that out to you. And it will be sometime in January that we will come back to the Messianic Secret. But yes, that is one of the things that is a distinguishing feature of Mark. So you were in good company for having noted that. Anything else kind of still hanging out from previous sessions before we blitz into our next set of topics? All right. So last week we talked about who is Mark, what is Mark, why is Mark, and when is Mark. So we hit 4 of our 5 key question words. And now we are going to get to how. How exactly does Mark tell this story, and why does that make it a compelling account? So the first thing that we're going to note about Mark is his construction. The way he puts his sentences together is very simple. It is very basic. And, we're not 100% sure as to whether that was intentional or whether his facility with Greek was, maybe it was a second language for him. I hope to make the case that he is a very, he's a very good author. So it's not necessarily that the man doesn't know how to tell a story or doesn't know how to write. Maybe he's trying to write in a language that's not his native language. He doesn't have quite the grip on it. Or maybe he's trying to keep the language simple so that the most people have access to it. Whatever the case may be, scholars will generally break Mark up into about 88 units. And if you look in most Bibles, they have section titles that kind of correspond to those. It's something where you can kind of pull it out on its own and it would stand somewhat as its own story. Of the 88 sections in Mark, 80 of them begin with the Greek word kai, which is and. So the vast majority of Mark's things just start, and then this happened, and then Jesus did that, and then this happened. There is not a lot of setup prior to these things all the time. He just moves it right along. So Mark keeps things moving just by starting his sentences simply. He doesn't build a lot of stuff that refers back to other stuff. It's just, then the next thing happens. Then the next thing happens. So that helps keep things going at a good clip. One of the words that is most characteristic of Mark's gospel is the Greek word euthus, which is translated by most scholars as immediately. And several people note that it's kind of ironic that our word immediately is so long, given what it means. But there's one scholar, Richard Swanson, in his translation, he translates it as bang, bang, this happened, bang, that happened. Which, I can see some wisdom in that. But things in Mark happen one right after the other. Immediately, Jesus did this. Immediately, the demon came out. So our sentences are simple. We keep emphasizing that things are happening like that. Mark uses this word euthus 42 times in his 16 chapters. Matthew uses it 7 times in 28 chapters. Luke is even longer than Matthew, and he uses it 1 time in his whole gospel. So this is really characteristic of Mark. Stuff happens right away. There is not, he and John do not see eye to eye on this sort of thing. John likes to sit with stuff for a while and kind of meditate on it. Mark does not have time for that. This, interestingly enough, kind of mirrors what's going on with Jesus. Chapters 1 through 10. Let me ask this question first. How long was Jesus' ministry? How long was Jesus at work doing his thing?
Little under 3 years.
3 years.
3 years. Anybody want to take any other guesses?
That's what I thought too.
Okay. Why do we say 3 years? What is our basis for that understanding?
Because John's gospel talks about the festival to go to Jerusalem 3rd time. First time,
Exactly.
2nd time, and 3rd time.
Exactly. John has Jesus going to Jerusalem again and again, and based on which festivals he goes to and how many times, they said, well, it had to have been about 3 years because this is how many pilgrimages he makes. Absolutely. Nick gets a gold star for tonight. What about Matthew, Mark, and Luke? If we did not have John's gospel, how long would we assume that from the baptism with John to Jesus' death and resurrection, how long that took?
1 year.
1 year, maybe less. Matthew and Luke maybe give a few more descriptors about, 5 days later he did this, at sunset the next day this happened. But we're not talking about more than a year because Jesus only celebrates Passover once. And that's pretty significant for their theology. You'd think they would tell us if Jesus was celebrating Passover again. So we have a period of possibly up to a year, but no more than a year. And Mark takes 10 chapters to cover, several months to a year. chapters 11 through 16. Chapter 11, he gets to Jerusalem. He has these 6 chapters cover 7 days. So the pace of the narrative is moving along at a really good clip. Everything is happening one right after another. He gets to Jerusalem, and the pace comes to a crawl. Interestingly enough, when Jesus is in Galilee, he's bouncing around everywhere. We have frenetic Jesus. He's everywhere. And while he's doing that, he is doing works of power. He's casting out demons. He's healing people. He's walking on water. When he gets to Jerusalem, Jesus is kind of hemmed in. He is not doing as many works of power. He spends a lot more time teaching and a lot more time disputing with the people in Jerusalem. So as his pace slows down, it seems that his ability to maneuver also is impacted. So Mark definitely loves to move the story along, but up to a point. When he gets to Jerusalem, he slows way down and he says, we are going to take our time with this. Here is really critically important. In fact, it may be the key to that messianic secret. I got to make sure I keep Tom's interest on this. So part of what makes Mark a compelling story is he knows how to keep things moving along. People want to find out what happens next. Mark keeps up with that. So that's one aspect of it. Let me stop there. Questions, comments, concerns?
I have a question for you.
Yes.
I know we probably discussed this in the last couple of weeks, but would you say that Mark wrote this then after Jesus was several years after this? Well, how would he know that chapters 11 to 16 were the most important things? What made him decide that? If you're writing a story, how do you know that this is going to be the most important thing for the rest of the world for centuries upon centuries to...
Yes. Well, I mean, certainly this was written at least a generation after Jesus, we think. So we know, Mark knows how the story ends. So we can see even in Paul's letters, which are the earliest accounts of Jesus we have, are actually in Paul's letters. Paul, I think, only has one saying of Jesus in all of his letters, and he talks a lot about Christ crucified. His favorite thing to talk about is Jesus' death and resurrection. How we tell the story of Jesus' death and resurrection is really critically important. So my guess is that the stories that Mark heard about Jesus probably, for Mark, everything points to Jesus' death and resurrection. So again, I'm tipping my hand to later times, but everything in Mark points that direction. Some scholars say, the cross casts a shadow on everything in Mark. So I think for Mark, it's particularly important. And when we get to talking about how Mark actually would answer the question, who is Jesus, we're going to see that come out in more clear relief. But I think the fact that Jesus suffers, dies, and God resurrects him is so critically important for all the New Testament authors, that it is not a surprise that Mark spends so much time with, this is what Jesus did when he was in Jerusalem. These are the things that led him to the cross. So I think that maybe reveals for Mark what's important about Jesus. These deeds of power that he does, the healings, the teaching is important, but it is certainly not more important than Jesus' death and resurrection. So I think it kind of, to me, it tells us a little bit about Mark's priorities, about this is what's important, because Jesus dying and rising again does something We don't know exactly how it works, but we know it has something to do with God's kingdom coming into being. So that is my sense of how Mark said, I got to spend a lot of time with this. Other thoughts, questions? Realized I left my Bible over here. Okay. Let's turn to our text. One of the things that is a distinguishing characteristic of Mark, even though Mark is shorter overall, there are a lot of instances where his account of a specific event is longer and significantly more detailed. Mark wants you to feel like you are actually there, watching it happen. And remember, what was our conclusion about Mark's purpose? Why did he write this book? What does he want the end result to be?
He wants people to be inspired by Jesus' actions and emulate his way of living.
Right. He wants you to be drawn into this story and go, wow, this Jesus guy was really great. Wouldn't it be great if I can be more like that? So when he tells a story, he really wants it to be something that draws you in, something where you can kind of see yourself being there and see Jesus in action. Now, if the two-source hypothesis is correct, and Matthew and Luke started with Mark, I think it's very interesting what we're about to see. That raises some interesting questions for what Matthew's and Luke's priorities were. So why don't we go ahead and start that? Carol, will you please find for us Matthew 17, 14 through 21? We're going to read that, and then we are going to compare that to Kim sharing with us Mark 9, 14 through 29.
When they came to the crowd, a man came to him, knelt before him, and said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he is an epileptic, and he suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water. And I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was cured instantly. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "Because of your little faith. For I truly tell you, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here to there,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you."
All right. So here we have Mark's account, or Matthew's account. How does Mark tell this story? Kim? Kim, you got to unmute yourself.
I was already done. No, I'm just kidding. All right, sorry about that. When they came to the disciples, they saw a great crowd around them and some scribes arguing with them. When the whole crowd saw him, they were immediately overcome with awe, and they ran forward to greet him. He asked them, "What are you arguing about with them?" Someone from the crowd answered him, "Teacher, I brought you my son. He has a spirit that makes him unable to speak. And whenever it seizes him, it dashes him down, and he foams and grinds his teeth and becomes rigid. And I asked your disciples to cast it out, but they could not do so. He answered them, You faithless generation, how much longer must I be among you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him to me. And they brought the boy to him. When the spirit saw him, immediately it convulsed the boy, and he fell to the ground and rolled about, foaming at the mouth. Jesus asked the father, How long has this been happening to him? And he said, From childhood. It was often cast him into the fire and into the water to destroy him. But if you are able to do anything, have pity on us and help us. Jesus said to him, If you are able, all things can be done for the one who believes. Immediately the father of the child cried out, I believe, help me unbelief. I believe, help my unbelief. Yes. When Jesus saw that a crowd came running together, he rebuked the unclean spirit, saying to it, You spirit that keeps the boy from speaking and hearing, I command you, come out of him and never enter him again. After crying out and convulsing him terribly, it came out, and the boy was like a corpse, so that most of them said, He is dead. But Jesus took him by the hand and lifted him up, and he was able to stand. When he had entered the house, his disciples asked him privately, Why could we not cast him out? He said to them, This kind can come out only through prayer.
So what are the differences between how Matthew tells the story and how Mark tells the story? What do we get in Mark that we do not get in Matthew?
Kind of the backstory, how long it's been going on, and it's a little more descriptive.
Yeah, we get kind of how long this is going on. The father says in a little more detail. Speaking of detail, we get some gory details. We get foaming at the mouth and grinding teeth. He becomes rigid. We get a lot more details. What else do we get from Mark that we don't get from Matthew?
Well, there's a difference between the two of them, where Jesus said to the disciples in Matthew that they could not remove the demon because of their little faith, but in Mark it was because the demon could not be removed only by prayer.
Yeah, kind of the causality has changed, which is very interesting. Matthew many times talks about, the people who have just a little bit of faith. And I think as often as not, he is using that as a positive term. Here, I don't think Matthew is using that as a positive term. But the difference between you don't have enough faith, that's why it didn't work. And here Jesus saying this kind can only come out through prayer. So is he saying you guys weren't praying about it? But yeah, why they had to kick it up to Jesus, why they couldn't handle it. That changes. What else do we get here? What about the actual healing and its aftermath? What's different between Matthew and Mark? What do people think has happened to the kid after Jesus heals him?
They think he's dead.
I think he's dead. Yeah, that's not a real good healing. So they think he's dead. And interestingly enough, it says here, Jesus took him by the hand, lifted him up, and he was able to stand. There are two words that are commonly used for resurrection in Greek, and they translate one of them as lifted him up. Usually they translated that as, raised him up, or he was raised, and to be able to stand up again. It's actually the word for resurrection. So they think he is dead, and Jesus, in a sense, raises him up and resurrects him here. So we have that death and resurrection motif kind of entering in the side door here. in Matthew, does Jesus actually see this happen to the child?
No.
No, the parent comes and says, I need you to help my child. This is what's going on. In Mark, the kid actually has an episode right there in front of Jesus. And Jesus says, I can see what's happened. How long has this been happening? He has a much more detailed conversation with the father. The father asks him again. The father approaches initially and says, please help my child. And then as the child is actually sick, right there in front of Jesus, he says, please help him. You can see what's happening. Mark also does more to set the scene. In Matthew, it's just kind of a guy comes up to Jesus and says, help me. But in this, Jesus has come down from the mountain from Transfiguration, and the rest of the disciples who were hanging out down there, they're getting into it with the scribes and all these people. So it's like this mob scene going on in Mark that kind of sets the scene for it. Whereas in Matthew, it's just someone comes up to Jesus and says, help me, and Jesus helps him. Which version do people like better?
Probably people like the short version and the not so descriptive. I like description, but maybe some people don't like.
No, I'm not asking what you think generally. Like, which one do you like better? Kim likes Mark. Kim
I
likes
I like Mark.
Mark.
It makes me visualize it better. You can visualize the whole thing happening.
You can see yourself there.
What about the part where Jesus calls the disciples in Matthew, saying that, how long must I be with you, or something like that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, how long?
Yeah, how long do they put up with you? Isn't that kind of harsh?
It's very harsh. Jesus is not always kind to the disciples. You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer do I need to be with you? So right there we have that's one of Matthew's things there. You faithless people, if you had just a little faith, you could do this. I think that's the sort of thing where he is definitely talking to the disciples. Jesus expects in Matthew that the disciples should be able to do this, and they can't. So you faithless and perverse people, you people you are turned in all sorts of weird ways you shouldn't be. How much longer do I have to deal with this? When will you learn? But I think he is also, I envision it as Jesus is telling the disciples this, but he's saying it loud enough so that everyone else around them can hear too. By implication, they too are faithless because they're not doing squat to help this kid either. So I think it is, and remember, Matthew is dealing a lot with, we are trying to determine which group within Judaism are the true heirs to the story of God and Israel. And Jesus is saying, you people who aren't with me, you're the faithless people. So I think that suits Matthew's purposes to put that in there. That's my conjecture. So there. Does anybody like Matthew's account better? And it's okay if you do. You're not going to be asked to leave or anything. No takers. All right. Sorry, Matt. So yeah, again, even though Mark is a shorter work overall, when he's telling stories about what Jesus does, he makes it really vivid and really detailed. He wants you to be able to see what's going on. He wants you to feel like you are there. Let's see this in play with another another story. Robin, will you share with us Matthew 8, 28 through 34? And Renee, will you share with us Mark 5, 1 through 20?
And when he came to the other side, to the country of the Gadarenes, two demon possessed men met him, coming out of the tombs, so fierce that no one could pass that way. And behold, they cried out, "What have you to do with us, O Son of God? Have you come here to torment us before the time?" Now a herd of many pigs was feeding at some distance from them, and the demons begged him, saying, "If you cast us out, send us away into the herd of pigs." And he said to them, "Go." So they came out and went into the pigs, and behold, the whole herd rushed down the steep bank into the sea and drowned in the waters. The herdsmen fled, and going into the city, they told everything, especially what had happened to the demon-possessed men. And behold, all the city came out to meet Jesus, and when they saw him, they begged him to leave their region.
Hey, Jesus, we need you to get out of town. All right, so we have Matthew's account of it. Renee, tell us how Mark shares this story.
They went across the lake to the region of the Gadarenes. When Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an impure spirit came from the tomb. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain. For he had often been chained hand and foot, but he broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. When he saw Jesus from a distance, he ran and fell on his knees in front of him. He shouted at the top of his voice, "What do you want with me, Jesus, Son of the Most High God? In God's name, don't torture me." For Jesus had said to him, "Come out of this, you impure spirit." Then Jesus asked him, "What is your name?" "My name is Legion," he replied, "for we are many." And he begged Jesus again and again not to send him out of the area. A large herd of pigs was feeding on the nearby hillside. The demons begged Jesus, "Send us among the pigs, allow us to go into them." He gave them permission, and the impure spirits came out and went into the pigs. The herd, about 2,000 in number, rushed down the steep bank into the lake, were drowned. Those tending the pigs ran off and reported this in the town and countryside, and the people went out to see what had happened. When they came to Jesus, they saw the man who had been possessed by the legion of demons, sitting there dressed and in his right mind, and they were afraid. Those who had seen it told the people what had happened to the demon-possessed man, and told about the pigs as well. Then the people began to plead with Jesus to leave their region. As Jesus was getting into the boat, the man who had demon-possessed begged to go with him. Jesus did not let him, but said, "Go home to your own people and tell them how much the Lord has done for you and how he has had mercy on you." So the man went away and began to tell in Decapolis how much Jesus had done for him, and all the people were amazed. Uh-oh.
Pastor, you have to unmute.
Maybe he's muted for a reason.
So we have something a little unusual there for Mark, where at the end Jesus tells the guy, "Go tell people what God has done here," rather than
Don't talk.
rather than don't tell anybody. So we have, just it's kind of one of the exceptions that proves the rule here. So what what are the key differences? What do we get in Mark that we don't get in Matthew?
In Matthew, it sounds as though there were two of them, not one.
Right? So we have a different number of people.
Is there a significance in why there is two different names of the countries?
No, we think those are just slightly variant names for the same place, somewhere on the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee. He's in Gentile country when this happens.
Okay.
So I have a question. In the first story, when he heals the boy, he doesn't cast this demon into anything. Why did he put them into swine or pigs for this healing? Why was that necessary, the poor pigs?
We'll get to that in a moment. What do we have in the conversation between Jesus and the demons in Mark that we do not have in Matthew?
There was a name implied that they were a legion, that so they actually were identified as, they actually had some identity.
Yeah, there's a little more conversation there between Jesus and whatever this is. Jesus, tell me your name. I want to know who I'm dealing with here. So what, by the way, the name Legion, what might be the significance of that? John, you want to chime in with that?
That is the basic Roman maneuver unit above 100 men. It's like 5,000 men. That's
So,
one of the. So it's it would be like a brigade in our military.
Yeah, so it's a Roman military unit. I suspect so. There's, as is almost always the case, I think there's a few things going on here. I think one of them is there's some not so thinly veiled commentary on what Jesus thinks of the legion that is possessing people in his country. He does not think real highly of them. The legion is made up of Gentiles who would keep a herd of pigs. Jews would not be keeping a herd of pigs. We know that much. And so I think there is a connection there. Kind of these things that are unclean are going together, and once they encounter the Messiah, they are kind of going to their doom. So I think that's a piece of what's going on. The whole question about why do these demons say, hey, let's, at least let us go into these things. That is a fascinating question and a very intriguing rabbit hole we will only stick our toe in tonight. The idea that somewhere there is a stock of souls, disembodied lives somewhere floating around, and once in a while one of them gets shoved into this terrible created matter that's all around us. And the body is a tomb for the soul. You will find that in all of your ancient Greek philosophers. That is straight up out of people who lived and worked in Athens. You will not find that in your Bible. In the Bible, we have creation. God creates actual stuff. And what does God say at every stage as God is creating this actual physical stuff? What does God say about it?
It is good.
It is good. And then end of day 6, God sits back and says, Tov me'od. This is very good. So this idea that, the physical is bad, and the spiritual needs to be freed from this awful physical stuff. Take that back to Greece. I love Greek food. I love Greek language. Some of their philosophical stuff I'm not down with. But in Genesis, you see God takes this good stuff God has made, pushes it together into a person, and breathes life into the person. The word for soul or spirit in Hebrew is nephesh, which is related to the word for your throat. It might have some, the word for spirit in Greek is pneuma, which, you know, if you have a pneumatic tool, Nick, you're an engineer. What do pneumatic tools run on?
Air.
They run on air. It's also the word for wind. So the idea of the soul, that thing that makes stuff that's alive different from stuff that's not, you know, this has no soul. It's created matter, but it's not alive. So the thing that makes this different from me, I am also created matter. I have nephesh. So it may have something to do with having breath. But the throat is also the means by which nourishment goes in. When you are alive, you have needs that need to be met. So it's a couple of those ideas put together. Why am I telling you this? In the Hebrew Bible, there's not a ton of material that would point us to the idea that things that are alive are disembodied, or if they are, it's not a good way to be, and it's not a way you want to be for long. There are some references to Sheol, which is kind of like the Greek idea of Hades. It's not hell. It's not like a place of torment. It's just kind of a dark, dingy. It's like Indiana in January. It's just not the place you would be if you had the choice. So what might be going on with these demons, if we are looking at it from a Hebrew Weltanschauung, worldview, to use another scholarly term there, is that these demons may understand that, you know, they will not last long unless they have something to live in. So there's a bunch of them. There's of them. So they say, well, there's a bunch of us. There's a bunch of pigs. How convenient. So maybe it is the idea that they need a physical body to dwell in that says, well, let's at least go into the pigs. The fact that the spirit is unclean and they are going into an animal that's unclean, the animals go berserk and throw themselves off a cliff. Suddenly, boom, no pigs, no demons. Everybody wins except the people who are taking care of the pigs and those of us who love pork products. So why do they go into the pigs? I think a piece of it has to do with kind of the Hebrew idea of, you know, a spirit or demon with something that is out there that's alive needs to have a material or a physical place to dwell. I think that's a part of it. And I think another part of it is it's a commentary on what's going on in the world around Jesus. We living here in Judea and Galilee, we have Legion who is here. Legion has come all the way from Italy, and Legion is tormenting us. Legion is sucking the wealth out of our country. Legion is abusing our people. Legion is disrespecting our faith. Gosh, wouldn't it be nice if somebody made Legion go away? So I think there's, like I said, as is often the case, I think there's a few things going on here. Does that hold water for people? Given that we're talking about things drowning, maybe hold water was the wrong choice of words, but you get what I'm saying.
There's something confusing in this Matthew account. Verse 32, that's in chapter 8, verse 32, it says, the whole herd of swine rushed down the steep bank into the sea and perished in the water. Okay?
Yep.
I'm reading from the Revised Standard Version.
Mhm.
Verse 33, the swine herds ran off, and on going into the town, they told the whole story about what had happened. So if the swine herd perished, how could they run out? What you talking about?
Oh, okay. So the herd of swine, the group of pigs, runs into the sea. Just as a shepherd is the person who takes care of a herd of sheep, a swine herd is a person who watches a herd of pigs.
Like a shepherd.
Right, exactly. So the group of pigs go into the water. The people tasked with herding the group of pigs see this happen, and they go into town. So we're talking about the group of pigs versus the people watching the pigs.
Thank you.
You are very welcome. So in this exorcism, Mark gives us a lot more detail about what's going on with this guy. Matthew likes to kind of have the pyrotechnics going on. That's why he's got two people that Jesus heals. Matthew likes to make the accounts a little more grand. Mark tells you, every little nitty gritty thing. The guy they've tried to restrain him. He is breaking free. He is too strong for people to bind him. So the fact that Jesus can do something says maybe Jesus can do stuff that people can't. The guy is howling. He is harming himself. Maybe they're trying to restrain him to keep him from harming himself, but they can't even do that. We get that name of the demon. And at the end of Matthew's account, where did it go? At the end of Matthew's account, it just ends with the people went to town, told the people in town what happened, and the people came out to meet Jesus and asked him to leave. Mark tells us that they went into town, and when they come out, they actually see what has happened. This guy who was beyond help is now together. He's like a new person. And they see this and they don't know what to make of it. So we get to see what goes on afterwards. The people in the town are confronted with this guy has been healed at a great economic cost to some of the people. He has been healed. And then we have that conversation between the man and Jesus. He says, Jesus, I want to come with you. Jesus is getting in the boat to go back over to Jewish territory on the west side of the lake. And Jesus, the guy wants to go with Jesus. And Jesus says, no, you stay here and you tell people what God has done for you. So Matthew doesn't give us anything about what happens to the guy, about what Jesus does afterwards. But Mark gives us this whole account of how this guy is a living testimony to the power of Jesus, now living in the town, and how Jesus says, you got to go tell people what God has done. And this guy goes into the city. He goes into the Decapolis and he starts telling people about Jesus. So I think it's really, Mark is really up to something very different in telling this story than Matthew is. What about these two stories? Anybody have a strong preference between Matthew and Mark? Anyone like one better than the other?
Mark.
I hear one vote for Mark.
I think that Matthew gives us the condensed version.
Mhm.
Mark gives us the full-blown effect, and I like the full-blown.
Yeah, there's kind of more to work with there.
Yeah.
Absolutely. Anybody want to jump on the Matthew bandwagon here?
I kind of do.
Oh, okay. Tell me,
Okay.
what makes Matthew more compelling for you?
Because Matthew, this story and the last, is shaping the details to fit his purpose.
Okay.
Okay. Mark is, I think, combating not only the demons, but he's combating the Gentiles. Matthew's trying to shape it so we get the right Hebrew group of religious types acknowledged. So
Okay.
so I think we've got two writers making strategic choices about the details that they put in, and they're fitting the details to their purpose.
Yes, they are telling the story from a specific point of view to meet a specific objective. Okay. That'll preach. There's one more of these that I want to do a little bit of comparative work here. We're going to pull Luke into this. Luke may have been sitting there saying, don't bring me into this, but here we are. Tom, will you share with us, please, Luke 3, 18 through 20? Jack, will you share with us Matthew 14, 1 through 12? And Fred, will you share with us, please, Mark 6, 14 through 29?
Okay, this is Luke. In many different ways, John preached the good news to the people and urged them to change their ways. But John reprimanded Governor Herod because he had married Herodias, his brother's wife, and had done many other evil things. Then Herod did an even worse thing by putting John in prison.
Okay.
Matthew 14. At that time, Herod the ruler heard reports about Jesus, and he said to his servants, "This is John the Baptist. He has been raised from the dead. For this reason, these powers were at work in him." For Herod had arrested John, bound him, and put him in prison on account of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, because John had been telling them, "It was not lawful for you to have her." Though Herod wanted to put him to death, he feared the crowd because they regarded him as a prophet. But when Herod's birthday came, the daughter of Herodias danced before the company, and she pleased Herod so much that he promised on oath to grant her whatever she might ask. Prompted by her mother, she said, "Give me the head of John the Baptist here on a platter." The king was grieved, yet out of regard for his oaths and for the guests, he commanded it to be given. He sent and had John beheaded in the prison. The head was brought on a platter and given to the girl who brought it to her mother. His disciples came and took the body and buried it. Then they went and told Jesus.
So already we can see from Luke to Matthew, we've added a lot more to the story. Let's see what Mark does with this. Fred, will you go ahead and share with us out of Mark 6?
King Herod heard about this, for Jesus' name had become well known. Some were saying John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and this is why miraculous powers are at work in him. Others said he is Elijah, and still others claimed he is a prophet like one of the prophets of long ago. But when Herod heard this, he said, John, the man I beheaded, has been raised from the dead. For Herod himself had given orders to have John arrested, and he had him bound and put in prison. He did this because of Herodias, his brother Philip's wife, whom he had married. For John had been saying to Herod, "It is not lawful for you to have your brother's wife." So Herodias nursed a grudge against John and wanted to kill him, but she was not able to, because Herod feared John and protected him, knowing him to be righteous and a holy man. When Herod heard John, he was greatly puzzled, yet he liked to listen to him. Finally, the opportune time came. On his birthday, Herod gave a banquet for his high officials and military commanders and the leading men of Galilee. When the daughter of Herodias came in and danced. She pleased Herod and his dinner guest. The king said to the girl, "Ask for me anything you want, and I'll give it to you." And he promised her with an oath, "Whatever you ask, I will give you, up to half my kingdom." She went out and said to her mother, "What shall I ask for?" "The head of John the Baptist," she answered. At once, the girl hurried into the king with the request, "I want you to give me right now the head of John the Baptist on a platter." The king was greatly distressed, but because of his oaths and his dinner guests, he did not want to refuse her. So he immediately sent an executioner with orders to bring John's head. The man went, beheaded John in the prison, and brought back his head on a platter. He presented it to the girl, and she gave it to her mother. On hearing of this, John's disciples came and took his body and laid it in a tomb.
So, what do we get from Mark that we don't get from Luke or from Matthew?
More details.
I'm sorry, what?
A lot more details of the story.
Yeah, absolutely.
Especially about Herod.
Yeah, this notion in Matthew, Herod keeps him alive because he's afraid of the mob. But in Mark, Herod is kind of fascinated and terrified by him. He doesn't know what to do with him. He's intrigued by him. He can't kill him because he's just too interested, and he knows he's a holy, righteous person. What are some other interesting aspects that Mark brings into the mix here?
Well, he tells about the choice that, I mean, not really a choice, but he said anything up to half his kingdom. I don't remember that being mentioned in the others. Why she wouldn't go for that, I don't know. You know,
Yeah.
I wouldn't have listened to mom on that one. I'm going for half the kingdom.
Yeah, I think it makes Herod look worse. What monarch promises to give someone half their kingdom? You know, not somebody who knows what he's doing, that's for sure.
Well, maybe he knew what he was doing.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
I mean, maybe he did know what he was doing. Maybe he so badly didn't want Herodias to be involved in this that he expected, even though he didn't want to give up half his kingdom, maybe he figured, let me at least give half the kingdom and then we can leave this whole John the Baptist thing out of it. Maybe he really didn't want to kill him.
So maybe he knew, you know, she's going to ask mom what she thinks, and we know mom's got it out for John. So maybe Herodias Herod is more clever than we're giving him credit for. That's certainly possible. I think you can make the case that Pilate is a little more clever than we usually give him credit for. So I like that. That'll preach.
I would counter that because Herodias already had Herod, so she already had half the kingdom.
She had the whole kingdom. Let's be honest.
Exactly.
There is a lot more detail in Mark's account about trying to figure out who Jesus is. Matthew just starts with, you know, Herod was pretty sure that he was John the Baptist come back to life. Why come back to life? Well, let me tell you, he had him killed. But here, there's some discussion, you know, who is Jesus? What is he doing? And some people are saying, yeah, you know, he's John the Baptist alive again. And other people are saying, no, maybe he's Elijah. You know, he's kind of got that end times kingdom thing going on. And other people are saying, maybe not Elijah, but he is like one of the prophets. He's doing some prophetic stuff. So there's a lot more discussion in Mark about who is Jesus, you know, who is he and what is he doing here? I think it's very interesting. I don't know if there's anything to it, but I think it's very interesting. In Matthew, it's the mother who says, tell him you want John's head on a platter. And in Mark, she goes to mom and says, Mom, what should I ask for? And mom says, John the Baptist's head. And the girl goes back and says, I want John's head on a platter. So she adds that detail there. I don't know if there's any significance to it, but I'm just intrigued by that idea that the girl adds the idea of serving it on a platter. I mean, is she nuts like her parents? Is she like a child, very literal? Well, isn't the head going to be kind of messy? Let's at least put it on some kind of dish that'll hold the blood and gore together if I need to bring it to mom. I don't know, but I just think it's interesting that Mark puts that detail on the girl. Like I said, I don't know what the significance is. I just think it's interesting.
Go ahead, Jack.
Okay. It's interesting to me that in the Mark account, Herod decides who Jesus is. And that basically he comes to a decision. All three possibilities are raised for him, and then Herod then makes a decision. And now he's faced with somebody that Jesus is now John the Baptist raised. Is that just another death and resurrection reference, or is Mark pointing to something down the road?
Well, I mean, I guess I would say if it is a death and resurrection reference, he's definitely pointing to something down the road. One of the things that I think made Christianity something that made, the Romans, for example, uncomfortable was when you are a government, you have the authority to put people to death. It's kind of the ultimate power. That is your ultimate tool for keeping people in line. And even in this country, people will advocate and say, the death penalty is a deterrent. People understand that if you do this, you could die. So for Rome, crucifixions were really public. It was so everybody could see. You screw with us, and this is what happens. Now, you've got people following a guy, and they're saying, you know what? You did your absolute worst, and our God can do better. Your most potent tool for trying to keep things the way you want them has suddenly been broken. So I wonder if that might be part of the reason why Herod would be scared that John the Baptist is back. This guy was nothing but trouble. I chopped his head off, and now he's back. What do I need to do to get this guy to go away? So yeah, I don't know that it is necessarily a death and resurrection thing, because we know Jesus is not John the Baptist. All our gospel writers go to great lengths to say they are different folks doing different things. But I think the idea that people in power start to get skittish when they think their most potent weapon has suddenly been neutralized. Maybe there's some parallels here with the Passion account. I'm just thinking that off the top of my head. I don't have a well-reasoned or thought out scheme with that, but it's got to be related to something else. They wouldn't just throw that in there just because it's something to do.
I got a little thought on that as well. And, in Herod's case, I mean, again, he's supposed to be a man of power. But who actually made the decision? Herodias and the daughter.
Mm-hmm.
So how powerful really is he? And I mean, the way it's explained in Mark, and the other readers, I mean, and Matthew and Luke also, but keep in mind, I mean, he's got a crowd of people there. So he's nervous. I mean, he's nervous that, he's going to look bad if he don't, live up to his, offer.
Yep.
So how powerful is this guy really?
He's
Other than causing someone to die.
right. He's kind of beholden to all these people who are there. He invites them there because he's got to impress them. He's got to curry favor with these people so he can call in that favor later. Not only that, but of course, he is a king who serves at the pleasure of the Romans. If the emperor decides this guy is not seeing to my interests, he'll just have him deposed. If there's, royal families are a dime a dozen over there, we'll find someone else who will play ball.
So once again,
right.
Shady politics, even back then.
Yes. I mean, some of these people look, make Cook County look fair and honest.
Was this Herod the Herod that was a hostage with the Augustus Caesar and his family?
I think so. Off the top of my head, I believe so. The timing would work out for that. This is a different Herod than the one who was in power when Jesus was born. This is not the Christmas Herod.
Yeah.
It was his father or grandfather. So yeah, this guy may have spent some time in Rome, where he was educated on what his best interests were.
So he knows how weak he really is.
Yeah, he's probably got an idea that he needs to toe the party line. Yeah.
Pastor, I got two things that I had noticed in Mark. Earlier when you introduced us to this study, that you said the word immediately was it was quite a few in this particular story, the word immediately. And now I have a question for you.
Yes.
In both Matthew and Mark, they both talk about the disciples taking and burying the body. Did the body come with the head?
It doesn't say. I guess you got to wonder, was Herodias wanting to keep it as a trophy, or was she just happy he was dead? I do not know. Yeah. Did they say, did she say, I don't need this anymore, you take it?
Inquiring minds.
That's right.
I have a question.
Yes.
So going to Mark's account, before verse 14 of chapter 6, verse 14 is for the beginning. The story begins of death of John the Baptist.
Mm-hmm.
Before that, it talks about Jesus casting out, the disciples casting out many demons and anointing with oil many who were sick and cured them. And that's when the people started to talk about Jesus, and the disciples said, John the Baptist has been raised from the dead, and these powers at work at him. And then Herod says, John, whom I beheaded, has been raised. But the story of beheading of John comes after that. So is this kind of written backwards? I mean, should verses 17 to 24, that part of the story should come before verse 14? John isn't beheaded yet.
Right. Yeah, I think both in Matthew and in Mark, Herod becomes aware of what Jesus is doing, and he says, gosh, this reminds me a lot of John. So the story of what happens to John the Baptist is a flashback. So if the story was written in chronological order, this would have occurred a little bit earlier. But I think Matthew, Mark, and Luke all talk about Herod treating John poorly, not at the time when it happened. So all of them kind of use it as a flashback. And I think all of them are using it again as a way to kind of set up a parallel between Jesus and John the Baptist. John the Baptist is a righteous man who who speaks truth to power, and look what happens to him. Jesus does a lot of the same thing. John says, repent, for God's kingdom is coming. Jesus says, repent, because God's kingdom is coming. So I think, it is not, Herod is thinking about this. He's thinking about this Jesus guy and says, there is something familiar about this guy. And it's, the story is told as a flashback. So it is, it is not in chronological order. So in our last couple minutes here, we're going to finish up this first section here on how Mark tells the story, about Mark's style. He's got his construction that keeps things simple, moves them along. He's really detailed in the way he tells these stories. He really makes them pop. Mark also Mark's Jesus is very Mediterranean. Let me say it like that. Mark's Jesus is very expressive. For people who may be accustomed to thinking of Jesus looking very Nordic and fair-skinned and blue-eyed and blonde hair and very serene, Mark's Jesus is a little bit jarring. We're just going to spend a couple minutes with the way Mark kind of reveals that Jesus is, very expressive. Tom, will you share with us, please, out of chapter 1, 40 and 41. Jack, if you can share with us chapter 8, 11 through 13. Or, wait a minute. Yeah, and then we'll get to, Gail and Nick, and then everybody will have read. Good. We'll go Gail, chapter 10, and Nick, chapter 10, verse 21. I forgot where I started, so we'll just go ahead and read, and we'll wrap it up for the night.
Right, chapter 1. A man suffering from a dreaded skin disease came to Jesus, knelt down and begged him for help. If you want to, he said, you can make me clean. Jesus was filled with pity and reached out and touched him. I do want to, he answered. Be clean.
So if we usually think of that phrase there, moved with pity, the word in Greek is related to the word for your guts. It's related to, the stuff that is here in your body. It's a gut feeling. It is a visceral reaction. Your viscera is, all this stuff in here. If we usually think of Jesus, he's mission oriented. He runs the numbers and says, yes, this is consistent with my mission, vision, and values. I will heal this man because it shows people what the kingdom of God is like. No, Jesus is just moved so much. He sees this guy suffering and he feels it deep in his guts. So that compassion, Jesus feels this. He doesn't act on logic or principle here. I think he would have come to the same conclusion anyways, but this is a gut reaction. So we see Jesus in Mark, he's very expressive. He goes with his gut here. What do we find in chapter 8?
The Pharisees came and began to argue with him, asking him for a sign from heaven to test him. And he sighed deeply in his spirit and said, why does this generation ask for a sign? Truly, I will tell you, no sign will be given to this generation. And he left them, and getting into the boat again, he went across to the other side.
How might we characterize that expression from Jesus?
Disgust.
Yeah, disgust, exasperation.
You'll just you don't get it, and you never will.
Right. I don't need to prove myself to you.
Jesus gets in the boat and leaves. This is not the shepherd who leaves the 99 and goes and gets the one. This is Jesus who goes, this is not worth my time. Because remember, in Mark, Jesus is, I'm moving on to the next thing. Bang, next thing. So Jesus goes with his gut. Jesus just gets exasperated. He gets to the end of his rope. You know, I know many of you are parents, so sometimes we get that feeling too. What do we find in chapter 10, 13 through 16?
People were bringing little children to Jesus to have him touch them, but the disciples rebuked them. When Jesus saw this, he was indignant. He said to them, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of God belongs to such as these. I tell you the truth, anyone who will not receive the kingdom of God like a little child will never enter it." And he took the children in his arms, put his hands on them, and blessed them.
So Jesus gets a little angry here. He gets a little testy with his disciples. He gets indignant. You know, don't stop them. They're doing the right thing coming to me. Don't you do this. So yeah, Jesus gets a little snippy with his disciples here. They're trying to stop him from, they're trying to stop the children, and Jesus goes and grabs the children and holds them. You know, I will tell you to stop, and I will show you that you are wrong. You know, Jesus gets angry. And what do we see in verse 21, chapter 10, 21 there?
Okay, this is a story of the rich man. Jesus, looking at him, loved him and said, "You lack one thing. Go sell what you own and give the money to the poor, and you will have treasure in heaven. Then come and follow me."
So Jesus is speaking to this man, acting on what emotion? Love. So, you know, Jesus feels that whole range of emotions, and he feels them strongly, and he wears his heart on his sleeve. So I think that's also an important thing. It makes the story vivid. I think it makes Jesus relatable. I think Mark's Jesus is maybe a little more relatable than, say, John's Jesus. John's Jesus, he is in control the whole time. He knows exactly what's going on. Mark's Jesus, I can relate to a little more. At least I can. And if you are telling the story with the hope of saying, we want you to be more like this, be able to say, hey, you know what? Jesus got angry too. There were things Jesus saw that just turned his stomach, and he had to do something about it. You know, Jesus spoke to people in love. I think that, again, goes towards what we think Mark's purpose was, to tell the story of Jesus to provoke a response from us. So we are here at 8:30. I think we have spent a good evening here with Mark's gospel and just scratched the surface of how Mark tells this story. Do we have any questions that can be answered quickly? If not, do what Tom did and jot them down for when we get back together. Very good. So we will reconvene in January. I will get information about, when exactly that will be out to you before too long. But I want to thank everyone for being here tonight. Thank you for your time and your insight. And I always value having the chance to study together. Let's close our time tonight by praying the Lord's Prayer together. Our Father,
who art in
heaven,
heaven,
hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done
on earth as it is in heaven.
Give us this day our daily bread, and forgive us our trespasses, as we
as
forgive
we
those
forgive
who
those
trespass
who trespass
against us.
against us.
And lead us not
Lead us
into
not into
temptation,
temptation,
but
but deliver us from evil.
For
For
thine
thine
is
is
the
the kingdom,
and the
and the
power,
power,
and
and
the
the
glory,
glory,
forever and
forever and
ever.
ever.
Amen.
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 Thank you, everyone. Good night. We will see everyone soon.
Thank you,
care.
Pastor.
Pastor.